everyone, and welcome to the MoeGamer podcast. I'm Pete Davison from MoeGamer.net, and as always, I'm joined by Chris Kasky from Mr. Gilder Pixels. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing well, Pete. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Enjoying the entry to September, also known as the month of 1,000 games.
Yeah, I have acquired many a game in just the past 2 weeks. I'm sitting here right now, sipping on cold brew and staring longingly at my copy of Astral Chain.
Yeah. So there's so just to summarize for people who are catching up on what is becoming available or available to order at the very least. This month we have, or sort of from the end of August anyway, we have Astral Chain, we have Demon X Machina, we have Crystar, we have River City Girls and Gunvolt becoming available to order from Limited Run Games. We have AI The Somnium Files from Spike Chunsoft. We have Zelda and something else from Nintendo out this month as well, aren't they? Someone reminded me the other day. It's like I listed all these obscure stuff, and someone else went, "Oh, there's also these really well-known things coming out as well."
Oh yeah. plus, like I'm itching to get pre-orders in for like Destiny Connect.
Oh yeah.
Is in the autumn. The Trails of Cold Steel 3 drops in November, so like I want to make sure to pre-order that.
Yeah, Nice America have had a couple of things up for pre-order as well, and again, it looks like some of those things that the limited edition version might be the only way to get them as well. I'm just looking at what those were.
Yeah.
Remind myself. Yeah, so La Mulana 1 and 2.
Did they put the orders up for that?
They have in Europe. I don't know about North America, but
usually a couple days behind. That is a must-have.
Yeah.
What a beautiful package.
Yeah, I've still actually never played the La Monada games, but I know they are very, very good. So, yeah, this might be finally the time to jump on board with them. So
I've never loved and hated something simultaneously that wasn't a person as much as I do La Mulana.
Yeah, and you get 2 of them in this package. And it's this is another one of Nice America's sort of not that much more expensive than a standard retail release either. So it's $54.99 in Europe. And that gets you... what does it get you? 2 games for Switch, Xbox One or PS4. Hidden Treasures, The Tomb of La Mulana, which I think is an art book. A 2-disc soundtrack, a jigsaw puzzle, and a collector's box.
The music in these games is hot fire. The music is so good. Like, I know I say that, like, and like so good is such like a lame description, but like it's cool because it's very much just like Japanese, like FM synth kind of feeling, but like kind of mixed with that like high adventure, like Indiana Jones style, like
oh sweet,
like it's just very, very motivational, and yeah, these games are really special. Like I said, it's a tremendous amount of love-hate with these, but still worth owning.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of having them both in one packaged release like this is going to be really nice. That's due out in early 2020, but you can pre-order it now from Nice America. So keep an eye out for that. All right, so we've already kind of started on the news already, but that's going to be our first segment as usual. Then we'll follow that with what we've been playing recently. And then we will talk about that. And then finally, our third segment today, after we got all academic and quite heavy last time, we thought we'd have a fairly light-hearted discussion about sort of some favourite boss fights and things today. So, look forward to that in the third segment. So,
just a quick update to last week's episode. In preparation for this week's episode, I watched a great deal of Secret of Mana footage and realized that Secret of Mana alone completely invalidates the entire theory that I put out in the last episode. Because I forgot about Secret of Mana pausing to let you make menu choices during the magic.
Oh no.
So it totally invalidates most of the distinctions I made in the last episode. That is why we made sure to put in the disclaimer that it was an ever-evolving theory.
Or is that a genre all of its own?
Secret of Mana is its own special thing.
Well, I mean, you could make an argument that that also goes alongside stuff like Baldur's Gate, which had its active pause system as well, didn't it? As well, but it was mostly real time. Other than that, but that wasn't sort of press a button to attack. So anyway, that's a discussion for another day. Let's talk about news. So kicking off with Shovel Knight. Tell me more about Shovel Knight, because this is something that I have so far resisted checking out, but I know you're big into it.
Just in general,
generally.
So Shovel Knight is kind of a franchise that when it originally was kickstarted, and it's the name of the company is Yacht Club Games, and they are composed largely of people with ties to WayForward. So they kind of continue WayForward's kind of emphasis on old school 2D kind of stuff. The original Shovel Knight was an 8-bit title, very much trying to kind of emulate and pay tribute to specifically the NES. They worked very hard to stay to kind of NES restrictions in terms of color and sprite restrictions, with a lot of modern flourishes as well. But it wasn't perfect, but the idea was to make it feel like a modern NES game.
It was kind of our one of the earlier ones to do what we described as modern retro, wasn't it? Sort of incorporating that 8-bit aesthetic, but doing stuff that wouldn't have actually been possible to do on those old platforms. So, yeah.
So there's a couple new pieces of news surrounding Shovel Knight in that we finally have a release window for the kind of fully complete physical edition, which is going to have the original Shovel Knight game as well as all the expansions pressed on a physical disc. And another really interesting piece of news is that they have paired up with Nitrome, which is another indie developer well known for their really excellent pixel work. Most recently, I think they've come into the picture due to a game called Bomb Chicken.
Oh yeah,
which Limited Run did a pressing of a little while ago, and it's quite good. So they are making another Shovel Knight game called Shovel Knight Dig, which has a kind of specific emphasis on like the shovel work as part of navigating around the backgrounds, digging through like big parts of the stage that are kind of like covered in dirt, which wasn't really part of the original Shovel Knight. It had a bit of a Mega Man feel to it.
It was a bit of Mega Man and a bit of DuckTales, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
I understand. Yeah.
And this new game looks to be taking quite a bit of what kind of defined the original Shovel Knight, but then melding it with kind of I don't know if you ever played any of the SteamWorld Dig games where you actually have to like chip your way through these environments, and it's kind of adding a bit of that. So they've been very careful to point out that this is a spin-off game. This isn't like a sequel. It's just kind of them allowing someone else essentially to make a game within the Shovel Knight property.
Yeah.
Which is really, really cool. And once again, Nitrome's specific approach to pixel art is just really pleasant. So, just very excited to see this. The footage is beautiful.
Yeah, sounds pretty cool. I mean, to clarify, the reason I've sort of resisted Shovel Knight up until this point is not because I know I won't like it, because I know I will like it, but I've also been very aware that they've been continuing developing it and adding to it and putting expansions and stuff on it. So I might actually finally bite on this when this sort of complete edition comes out.
Yes.
And give it a go. So I can sort of have the complete experience right away. But good news for Shovel Knight fans. Shovel Knight has been like a real success story of the indie scene, hasn't it? It's sort of really sort of exploded into kind of mainstream awareness and all sorts of things. So yeah, good on them. Good on them for doing something cool with that.
I mean, it's really quite amazing to see how much Shovel Knight's blown up. I mean, how many indie games do you think of that have amiibos?
Yeah, no, exactly.
And like, there's an amiibo of Shovel Knight, and there's a 3-pack of 3 of the villains coming out.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. It's like, we've been like screaming that we want Shantae amiibos for how long, and like Shovel Knight's cracked the code. Like, those exist, which is really cool.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. Moving on. So the next story you've got on the list is Warriors Orochi 4 Ultimate has been confirmed for PS4 and Switch this December. and is coming to PC in February 2020. So it's coming to consoles in Japan in December, I should say, and then a worldwide release, including a PC version, is coming in 2020. So this is going to incorporate all the base content from Warriors Orochi 4 that came out, was it last year or this year? I can't remember.
I think it was this year, which I was really surprised because it's coming really fast.
Yeah. So it's on the way. So it incorporates all that, any DLC that was released. They've also said that they're not going to really do any more DLC for Ultimate as well. So if you've been holding off Warriors Orochi 4, waiting for kind of a complete edition, it sounds like this is going to be it. There might be some cosmetic bits and pieces, but other than that, they're not going to do any like substantial story content or new characters or anything for it. So
yeah, I mean there is going to be new characters for Ultimate. They're just not going to come. They're just not going to come later.
Yes,
because the new girl looks really cool.
Yes, they're bringing in sort of a few classics from older Koei Tecmo and Omega Force games, haven't they? There's, isn't there Joan of Arc from Bladestorm, I think, is it?
Yes, yep, Joan of Arc.
Who else is there?
There's a new girl who's based on Greek mythology, and I don't remember her name, but her whole deal is that she's fighting with Hecatoncheir, which is like the multi-armed giant from like mythology that was actually, if you remember in FF13, that was Vanille's summon, was Hecatoncheir, the giant, which is like 100 arms. So that's really cool. I'm really interested to see how that's going to factor into like the Muso gameplay.
Yeah, that should be really cool. Yes, so that is on the way. Moving on, we've got a Samurai Showdown Neo Geo collection coming for release this winter, which should be cool. And I think they said that this is going to be including the Neo Geo Pocket game. I think it was like as either a pre-order bonus or like thing that you get early on.
That was for the Switch version of the new Samurai Showdown.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, separate thing, but also really freaking cool. So, like, with the Switch version of the new Samurai Showdown, you get the Neo Geo, one of the Pocket Samurai Showdowns. But yeah, I'm just super excited for this this Neo Geo collection because to have, but I think it's 6. I think it's 1 through 5 plus the updated version of 5.
Yeah,
like I want these more than I want the new Samurai Showdown. Like,
yes. So that should be cool. Again, this is not a series I know a lot about, so this will presumably be a good way to sort of get to know it a bit better.
It is deliciously inaccessible.
Good.
Samurai Showdown makes 0 sense to me, but it's okay because it's beautiful and the character design is out of this world.
Yeah. All right, and this is worth noting. This is going to be handled by Digital Eclipse as well, who did the SNK 40th Anniversary collection. So, and they're also very good at emulation. So, yeah, this should be a good collection that runs really well on pretty much every platform it comes to. So, good stuff. Right, continuing on. Also on the retro re-releases front, it looks like we're getting a Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection. So continuing on with sort of Capcom's trend of re-releasing its old games in packages, we're getting the Mega Man Zero games, which are, remind me, these are the handheld ones, aren't they? Is that right?
That's correct. So Mega Man Zero 1 through 4 were originally on the Game Boy Advance. Mm-hmm. I often forget that there's 4 of those. Then they were also re-released as a collection that you could get on the DS, and then ZX and ZX Advent were also on the DS. So this is really cool because if you buy this and then theoretically you get all the Gunvolt stuff, you've got a massive collection of like some of Intercreate's greatest works on the Switch. Like this is tremendous.
Yeah.
And the ability to play ZX and ZX Advent on a TV is going to be amazing.
Yes, definitely.
That's never been possible. Like, it was always possible technically to play 0, 1 through 4 on a TV if you had the Game Boy player for the Game Boy Advance. But this will be the first time that, like, without a weird workaround, these games will be playable on a big screen with a proper controller. Which is I've always struggled with these games because I'm just not great with action games on a handheld.
Yeah. No, I know the feeling. It's, I mean, a combination of factors a lot of the time, isn't it? Like sort of cramped screen space and things being a bit small and difficult to pass and that sort of thing. So yeah, I tend to have a bit more success on either TV-based stuff or handhelds that have got a slightly bigger screen. So yeah, this will be good. I'm curious to check these out. Sort of having really kind of got to know Indie Creates over the course of the last 2 or 3 years or so, I'm very interested in seeing some of their older stuff. And I know the Mega Man stuff that they've contributed to is very well regarded and beautiful to look at as well. So
yeah, these are special games, and it's you're getting 6 games.
Yeah,
in this collection, it's massive.
Yes. Yeah, so that's looking good. All right, continuing on. Really struggling with these links we've posted. They're all from Silicon Era, so none of them are working.
Yeah, but everything you need to know is in the title, right? So like,
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so in September. In fact, September the 5th. That's very soon, isn't it? So Moero Crystal H is coming to Nintendo Switch. This originally came out on Vita in 2015, but this is one of Compile Heart's ones that never had an English version. Are they doing an English version of this one? That's the one detail I can't seem to find.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I mean, it would follow suit, right? that there'd be at least an Asian English language.
Well, yeah. The other thing to bear in mind is that they did actually officially release Moero Chronicle in English on Switch as a digital-only title, yes, but they did release that officially in English on Switch in Europe and America. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, assuming they have done an English translation of that, which they didn't do for the original Vita release, it was just a Chinese one for the Asian release. Yeah, we may well see this as well, but at the minute it's quite hard to check whether that's going to happen or not. So let's move on. All right, continuing on the ROM Cassette Collection series. I did read something about this the other day, but I completely forgotten what it was. This
gets you hooked up with Rodland, my brother.
Oh, that's right. Yes. So this is sort of like some re-releases of various games that originally released on like the Famicom and stuff, wasn't it? So, and they're bundling them together. So there's stuff like Rodland, old Jalico releases, that kind of thing. Let's see what else is going on. So the ROM Cassette Collection. So this is from City Connection, who own the rights to most of Jalico's stuff now.
Yep.
So what have we got? So collections include Exerion, Biosenshi Dan Increaso Tono Tatakai. Not heard of that one. Argus, Rodland, Yokai Club, the unreleased Famicom version of Soldam. So Soldam came out relatively recently on Switch. That's the Rodland spin-off puzzle game. There's very little to do with Rodland aside from having the same characters in it. And then there's going to be a third collection that includes the Wing of Medulla, AF World, Battle Formula, also known as Super Spy Hunter, Hiberiki, and other titles, apparently.
This is huge for Hiberiki.
Yeah.
Hiberiki is amazing. It was localized as Euphoria, but only in PAL territories.
Oh, okay.
And it's one of those games that is just like heavily sought after and like super well regarded in like terms of like late era NES titles.
Right.
It's a beautiful, like slightly like almost like a proto open-ended platformer. It's got like big stages and like multiple characters with different abilities you can flip between. Really, really cool game, and the opportunity to get a hold of this on modern consoles is pretty exciting.
Oh, that's interesting.
It did get a release on the Wii Virtual Console,
right,
as a digital only.
Okay,
but it's cool. It's a really neat game. Sunsoft and Success working together made develop this series.
That's a dream team.
Yeah.
All right, so there aren't release dates or anything for that just yet, but they are on the way, and it looks like there's going to be 3 separate collections of those. So keep an eye out for detail for those. I've not heard of most of these games, but as I think we've talked about previously before, this makes me more interested in them because it's sort of like the SNK collection. I hadn't heard of most of those games before, but I really enjoyed finding out more about SNK's roots and that sort of thing. It'll be really interesting to see some of Jaleco's stuff as well. Jaleco isn't a developer I know very well generally, so yeah, this will be really cool to have a look at.
Yeah, for some reason, Jaleco. Whenever I think of Jaleco, the first game that pops into mind is Punky Skunk for the PlayStation, for the original PlayStation.
Oh God, Jesus. Yeah. The one that springs to mind for me is that they did some sort of racing game that I can't even remember the name of. But yeah, there was like a sort of rally game that they did back in about the 16-bit era, I think, and that's always the first one that springs to mind for me. It's like, although I love Rodland, it doesn't tend to spring to mind when I think of Jaleco. I just think of Rodland. But yeah. But anyway,
in retrospective, it was very fashionable to make fun of Punky Skunk back in the PS1 days because everyone had Polygon Fever, right? Nobody wanted 2D games. Yeah. But now, if you look at footage of Punky Skunk, it's really goddamn pretty. Gorgeous sprite work.
Yeah.
All right, that's it that's all I'll talk about Punky Skunk today.
So, Punky Skunk centric episode coming down the line then.
Yeah, right. Have you played Punky Skunk?
All right, continuing on, Sega recently officially announced that the Yakuza Remastered Collection is, it's already started coming to the West with the re-release of Yakuza 3 on PS4. 4 and 5 are coming throughout 2019 and 2020. I think the whole lot is going to be released by February of 2020. And February 2020 will also see a fairly limited release of a fully packaged version of all of them. So Yakuza 3, 4 and 5 on disc for PS4, meaning that you'll be able to play nearly every Yakuza game on one platform. So you won't be able to play Dead Souls, and you won't be able to play the weird Sengoku era one, but other than that, all the mainline Yakuza ones you'll be able to play on PS4, which will be great.
And in the West, at least, this is already available for pre-order on Amazon.
Yes, that's right. I don't think it is in Europe just yet, but it definitely is in North America. Because I looked the other day when Sega announced it, and it didn't seem to be on Amazon Europe, but I haven't checked today, so it may well have showed up by the time that you hear this.
This is an incredible package for $60.
Yeah.
This is more game than you could play in a year if you're a responsible adult. These games are massive.
Well, the interesting thing about the Yakuza games is that they're the kind of games that they're not difficult to finish, in that the main stories tend to be pretty short, but the wealth of additional content that comes in them, that is the reason to play Yakuza games. I mean, the stories are cool, the characters are cool, all that sort of thing, and the ongoing story of Kiryu and Haruka and that sort of thing, that is really cool. But the sort of the main appeal for Yakuza for a lot of people out there is sort of the strange side stories, the incidental characters, the feeling of Kamurocho evolving over time. Sort of from the late 80s onwards to the present day, and that sort of thing. So yeah, there is so much there to explore, and so yeah, I would definitely be picking this up, and at some point I'm gonna have to figure out how to tackle the Yakuza series because it's one that I want to write about. But at this point, it's the same problem I have with Trails. There's just so much game now. I'm just like, well, where do I start and where do I finish?
So while we're on Yakuza, do we also want to talk about the fact that Yakuza 7 is fucking turn-based?
Oh, please, yes. Oh, I love this.
Yeah, me too.
This is great. So Yakuza 7, which is coming west as Yakuza Like a Dragon, which is actually a literal translation.
Hilarious. Because of the that's Ryuga Gotoku is like a dragon. So this game is like a dragon, which reminds me of in the PS2 era, one of the Tenchu games was localized as Tenchu Wrath of Heaven.
Yes,
Tenchu is Wrath of Heaven. like the game title of the game was Wrath of Heaven.
Yeah. So this is sounding interesting. So I must confess that at the time of recording, I haven't actually got around to watching the trailer yet because it's quite a long one. But from what I understand, part of the thinking behind this is that the main character likes Dragon Quest, and so he fights in turn-based because he likes Dragon Quest.
They've actually tied it to a plot thing and a character thing.
It sounds like it. They certainly mentioned Dragon Quest in it, so yeah,
that's
I think
awesome.
It does sound like it's relevant. So there are a few words from the chief producer Masayoshi Yokoyama here. So the new system is called the Live Command RPG Battle, which means that the fight is constantly in motion. So what this means is that characters move in real time, but you sort of issue commands as you're going through. So it's still got sort of things like the physics of the objects, so you can sort of still slam people into things and stuff like that. But there is like a turn-based element to it as well. So turn order is determined by characters' stats, but it also takes into account things like positioning on enemies, your distance from enemies, any objects that you got nearby you, and that sort of thing. So yeah, this is going to be a really interesting system. And one of the funniest things about it is that this actually started as an April Fool's joke that everyone thought was just an April Fool's joke. But no, it's real. So yeah, Yakuza 7 is going to be quite different from the previous ones, which has already got a few people going, I'm not sure I like this. But I also saw someone on Twitter.
Screw them, they've got 6 games to play.
Exactly.
Let's do something new.
I also saw someone on Twitter the other day referring to Yakuza as a, quote, classic brawler series, and I just wanted to scream. It's like, no! That is not what Yakuza is. Please stop doing that. But anyway, yes. Yakuza 7 is on the way, and it looks very different. So yeah, I'm all for them trying something a bit different, particularly if they've got a new protagonist or something. It really makes sense for them to sort of go in a different direction and experiment a bit with the series, particularly as... Yeah, exactly. So... That's cool. Moving on, there was a trailer posted by P-Cube the other day from a game that I hadn't really noticed before, but it looks very cool. So this is a game called Dusk, which is set in Taipei, and it's an action RPG with sort of Musou-style fights, they call it, and an anime style. And this is coming out on PC on October 24th, Switch and PS4 on October 25th, in Europe, and October 29th for North America. And this looks like a really cool sort of stylish game. So there's a kind of two worlds element to it, where there's sort of the real world, so you're sort of wandering around this neon-soaked city, and then there's a sort of parallel world that you go into as well, where everything is sort of dark but with really bright highlights. So it's almost a sort of cyberpunk look about it. So I don't know a ton of details about the plot, but it certainly looks really cool. So I hadn't really heard of this before, but I'm very interested in it now, having seen the trailer.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I had heard of it just from following its development a little bit, because it's... Yeah. I think the game's actually developed in Taiwan.
Yes,
too. Right. It's not, it's not just like Taiwan themes. It's really cool to me. I know we've talked many times in this on our show here about how much I love to track development from other countries.
Yeah,
and see kind of how they feel a little different.
Yeah.
So I've never played a game from Taiwan before, so this is a really cool opportunity to experience development from a different perspective.
Yeah, definitely. All right, moving on. Other announcements that we got. Hatsune Miku is back next year. I don't think we got a specific date yet, but it is coming to Switch in 2020. And the game is going to be called Hatsune Miku Project Diva Mega Mix. It's going to have over 100 songs in it, apparently. Looking at the trailer, it seems to include both favourite songs from the last 10 years and some new songs as well. So, if you've been looking for some Project Diva action, this Switch version is going to be sort of the definitive way to experience it. Just by the trailers, it's going to be running at 60 frames a second, which will look lovely. And also, the big advantage of the Switch version is that it plays in handheld mode. And I don't know about how other people feel about this, but I've always felt that these games in particular feel really good in handheld mode, because it sort of gives you a feeling of kind of direct connection to the music, like you're actually playing an instrument. And that's something that I always feel you kind of lose slightly if you're playing a controller that is connected to a TV. So, I mean, I don't know if that means anything to you, but as a musician, that's how I've always felt about the rhythm games in general.
Yeah,
it's like that's why I prefer to play Senran Kagura Bon Appetit on Vita to PC. Despite the PC version being technically better, I still prefer the Vita version just because it feels better to play.
Yeah, the best experience I've ever had with Hatsune Miku is was with the 3DS one, the Chibi 3DS one.
Yes, yeah, that looks cool. New to this Switch mode, there's a Joy-Con based mode where rather than tapping buttons, you're tilting the Joy-Cons to sort of overlap icons that are coming down the screen. This looks like a sort of fairly newbie-friendly mode, because judging by the trailer, it seems to sort of have a very wide margin for error on that, which is good for anything motion control based. So if you want to enjoy a Hatsune Miku game, but you've always found sort of tapping out the note charts a little bit challenging, because they are challenging games, to be clear. These are some of the most challenging rhythm games on the market, I reckon, at the minute, or on sort of the kind of vaguely mainstream market anyway. But this looks like a good way of getting new people into the series. And of course, there's all the usual sort of dress up and interacting with Miku and her friends and that sort of thing. So yeah, this should be great. I will be all over this when it comes out. So that's coming to the West. They've already confirmed it's coming West in 2020. Right, and I think that's about it, isn't it?
Yeah,
Unless there's anything else you want to talk about?
Just an excited shout out that they've announced for Monster Hunter, the expansion for Monster Hunter World, that Xenagre is back. For anyone who cares about Monster Hunter, Xenagre is my favorite, so I'm very excited to see him in stunning 4K. Excellent.
That means nothing to me, but I'm glad you're excited.
He's like a lightning wolf bear, just like hybrid beast thing, and he's great.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, please look forward to that then. All right.
Sorry, man.
It's fine. You be excited about whatever you want to be excited about. It's cool. Right, so let's take a short break, and Chris can wipe himself down after that, and then we will come back and we'll talk about what we've been playing recently. So see you in a moment. Welcome back for our second segment. We're going to talk a bit about what we've been playing recently. So, have you managed to get any gaming time in lately, Chris?
I actually have. Good. Nothing like kind of new and exciting, but for those who are unaware and don't follow me on Twitter or whatever, I started a new job recently, and I've been a bit stressed out about it. So what I've actually been looking to do is find something that was kind of cozy and relaxing to play in the evenings. And
good plan.
So I've been watching my social media feeds a lot, and a lot of my friends are really super enjoying Dragon Quest Builders 2.
Oh, yeah.
And then it occurred to me that I never really gave Dragon Quest Builders 1 a fair shake, despite like buying it at launch. So, over the past 2 weeks, I've really just been enjoying kind of relaxing, cozy times with Dragon Quest Builders.
Cool.
And it's been a delight. That game is just constructed from the ground up to be just so satisfying and kind of low stress, and just makes you feel good for like every little accomplishment you achieve. To go through our normal, let's pretend nobody knows what this is spiel. Dragon Quest Builders essentially takes the design aesthetics of Minecraft, i.e. a world constructed entirely of cubes that lets you collect materials and build and reconstruct the world as you see fit, but it grafts it to the world of Dragon Quest. So it's got this whole cutesy medieval RPG overlay on it, and as part of inheriting Dragon Quest stuff, not only does it inherit Dragon Quest visuals and designs and enemies, but it also inherits kind of the ethos of an RPG in general. So it tacks RPG design mechanics on top of a similar Minecraft experience. So what a lot of people who are super into game design, such as myself, find off-putting about Minecraft is the general lack of direction.
Yes.
So what Dragon Quest Builders does is it has a quest structure. So you're actually guided through what you do in the world, and it slowly ramps you up to understanding what needs to be done. So is where Minecraft just goes, go, and it expects you to go on YouTube and like figure out how to build a house to keep you safe, or just futz around till you figure it out. Dragon Quest Builders has a cute little friend who comes up to you and says like, oh, well, you know, if we built a room with a bed and a lamp, we'd have a safe place to sleep. And like, ta-da, that's your first quest. So what it does is it slowly ramps you up to understanding its world through these light story-tied quests. And then after you beat the first mission, the first world, it's split up into 3 different kind of separate islands with little stories tied to them. Once you beat the first of those islands, then it gives you the sandbox world, because it's understood that now you know enough to play at your leisure.
Yeah.
And I just find the whole more tightly structured approach to it to just be so satisfying. Also, the fact that it's third person and not first person.
Yes. There's a lot of sort of nice refinements over the kind of the Minecraft formula there. So there's a much greater emphasis on sort of making things explicitly functional in Dragon Quest Builders. In Minecraft, there's a lot of just building stuff for the sake of it and making it look cool, but not necessarily do anything.
Yeah.
When I know there are ways to like do automation and all sorts of stuff in Minecraft, but in Dragon Quest, there's a specific emphasis on, particularly for the questline stuff, on sort of building rooms and sort of building rooms at a particular size containing a certain combination of things that causes that room to become something specific. And yeah, so in that sense, it's almost got a bit of almost like the DNA of something like almost like Theme Hospital and that kind of thing.
Sure.
In that you're sort of developing out an area in different ways in the way that you want within. But there's not even really certain constraints in Dragon Quest Builders because you've got a whole island to build on. But yeah, for the sort of main quest lines, you kind of expected to keep everything nearby and defend it from monsters and that kind of thing. And yeah, there's just a really nice sense of structure to it. But you do also have the freedom to piss around with it if you want to as well, which is really nice. And my wife has been playing Dragon Quest Builders 2 recently as well, because she absolutely devoured the first one when it came out on PS4, and picked up the Switch version as sort of something to play other than Final Fantasy XIV for a bit. And yeah, she really enjoyed that. She similarly devoured that one. Worked her way through the main quest, sort of experimented with building houses and stuff as well. So yeah, this if you enjoy the first one, the second one is even better. So yeah, if you do manage to beat the first one or exhaust its possibilities in your mind, do be sure to check out the second one as well, because it's certainly not just more of the same.
Yeah, I know the second one adds gardening, doesn't it? There's like a whole gardening and like vegetable growing and.
Yeah, there's like a farming system. There's sort of a really strong emphasis on it's not just you doing the building as well. So there's like the NPCs around the area. They can sort of help you out with projects, and you can sort of get people to help you out with the farming and stuff. So, and you sort of work on your popularity, and you can spend your popularity on learning new stuff. And there's vehicles and all sorts of crazy stuff. So,
vehicles.
Yeah,
that sounds great. The first one is kind of funny because it like. Narratively, it talks about that. Like you're working on your town, and like you talk to the people in your town. And it's like, yeah, man, we've been having so much fun building stuff. And then you look at the town, and it's like, bitch, you ain't built shit. You put 2 grilled mushrooms in the chest that I put in the kitchen. Like, stop telling me you're tired from building stuff.
No, this...
like you made 1 chair. You made 1 chair. Made 30 chairs.
Yeah, the second one, I haven't played it myself yet, but having watched my wife at various intervals playing it, yeah, there's definitely sequences where you can sort of leave the whole town to it, and they will be like building some walls or something like that to be ready for an incoming monster attack. Or at one point they build like a giant Kazapple cannon to take on a giant monster and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's.
Oh man,
yeah,
that's so cool.
It's great, and it's absolutely charming. And one thing that it's really reminded me of is just the music in Dragon Quest is just so beautifully composed.
Oh, yeah.
It's like even if it's just sort of like the MIDI versions rather than the orchestral ones, this is music that has been properly composed by someone who understands music. It's amazing. There's melodies and counter melodies and interesting harmonies and all sorts of stuff. And yeah, it's just beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it's really cool too, just from a perspective of like the way the games are put together, from like a narrative emphasis. But like what's really neat about these games is Dragon Quest's Builders 1 and Builders 2 actually are set up to be, as far as the story and continuity goes, related to the original Dragon Quest and in Dragon Quest 2.
Yes.
So it's really neat. Like Dragon Quest 1, like the ending of Dragon Quest 1, if you ever played the NES original, like the Dragon Lord gives the hero a choice. Like, do you want to join me or do you want to fight me essentially? And the whole storyline of Dragon Quest Builders 1 it's a what if story. Like, what if the hero had chosen to join the Dark Lord and the world had fallen into darkness, and now you're trying to fix the aftermath of that. And 2 has a similar structure. So it's really cute how they've tied it to the actual narrative of the original game.
Yeah. 2 is very directly related in some ways. So like this, you go and help rebuild Moonbrook at one point, for example, and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's lots of sort of series fan service in there. So yeah, definitely worth your time. So anything else you've been playing?
Not in-depth enough to have a thoughtful conversation about it, but I have been dabbling with some shmups lately. I got quite a couple shipments from some of my kind of back limited run pre-orders and stuff.
From your dealers.
Maybe in a couple weeks. From my dealers. Yeah, so like I did get Caladrius Blaze, Danmaku Unlimited 3, and Cyverior Delta. Cool. So maybe in another couple weeks I'll be ready to talk about those.
Yeah.
But I'm a bit overloaded with shmups right
now. It's a good problem to have. All right, so what have I been up to? So I've been playing a few different things recently. First one I want to talk a bit about is Wreckfest, which is a game by a company called Bugbear Entertainment, who are, depending on who you are known for various different things. So probably the most well-known thing that they've done is the Flat Out series on Xbox, I think it was, which was a sort of destruction-heavy racer series that has sort of become a bit of a cult hit over the years. So it's not super well-known or anything like that, but it was always very well regarded by people who played it. They also made Ridge Racer Unbounded for Namco, which was, as far as I'm concerned, a vastly underappreciated game. I mean, it's barely Ridge Racer, but it is cool. If you enjoyed Split Second and Blur, then Ridge Racer Unbounded is definitely a game you should play, because it's basically a spiritual successor to Split Second in particular. So there's lots of sort of driving through things and stuff exploding and dramatic camera angles and slow motion leaps across large gaps and that sort of thing. But so for the last probably 5 or 6 years at this point, they have been working on this project that was originally called Next Car Game. And I remember reporting on this, I think, when I was still working on GamePro, so that was back in like 2011. So Next Car Game was going to be a successor to Flat Out, for one thing. And they also wanted to draw some inspiration from some older games, like Psygnosis' old Destruction Derby games on PS1, and also a really, really old game called Street Rod that was on sort of EGA era PCs. It was a sort of first-person game about sort of racing old bangers and sort of racing for pink slips and that sort of thing. So
that sounds awesome.
Yeah. So Wreckfest is it's basically a banger racing game first and foremost. So sort of like you take a beat-up, shitty old car, take it into an arena full of mud, and then either try and smash everyone up or win a race. But it's there's a few noteworthy things about it. Sort of the first thing that they designed about this game was the damage model. So before they really got a fully playable game out the door, the first thing that they released to the public, because this is one of the first titles to do a kind of early access thing, as far as I remember. One of the first things that they released to the public was this thing called the sneak peek, where there was, you drove a car. It was in a completely abstract environment, but this abstract environment was filled with all sorts of scenery elements, some of which were static, some of which were physics based, some of which were sort of machinery and that sort of thing, and all of them were designed to do really unpleasant things to your car. And so this sneak peek was just a thing where you could drive around, you could smash your car into things, you could drop it into like giant wood chippers and that sort of thing and see what happens. And yeah, it was great, just because their damage model was so like it's a proper sort of soft body damage model. So like bits can come off your car, you can squash it, you can like shear off the front of your car, your wheels can fall off, all sorts of things like that. So that was sort of the the main attraction of this game from the beginning. But over time, they've sort of gradually built it into a full-on game. So the full PC version came out last June, I believe. And then just in the last week or so, they did a big patch for PC that corresponded with the release of the game on PS4 and Xbox One as well. So it's now available for consoles as well. So yeah, Wreckfest is now basically complete. And so what you have now is you've got a combination of a career mode where you take various cars and other vehicles through different events. You've got like a free-form single-player mode where you can set up custom events using the tracks and the vehicles you've got, and you can even create sort of asymmetrical events with different types of cars and vehicles competing against each other. There's a multiplayer mode that I haven't tried yet, and then on PC there's a very strong emphasis on mods as well. So there's lots of people building tracks for it, building new cars for it, sort of tweaking various elements about the experience as well. So this is one of those games, like, I'm not normally huge on mods, but this is one of those games that kind of has almost a sort of Trackmania feel about it, in that it's kind of designed to be a platform almost as much as a game. And sort of I
love that with racing games.
Yeah, racing games are absolutely ideal for it. So it's designed for sort of people to build on top of. So although the console versions are cool, this is one case where I probably would advise people to go for the PC version if you can run it. And some cool things about it are that it's not just car racing either. So, like, the very first event in career mode is the Destruction Derby, where you're all ride on lawnmowers. Then later on, there's a race where everyone is sitting on sofas that have engines inside them. There's apparently like a rocket-powered toilet at some point. There's a race where you are driving like a little three-wheeled van from the 1970s against an army of school buses. And so there's all sorts of really silly events in there, as well as sort of the more serious stuff. But even the more serious events are like, they're very much full contact races as well. So you're sort of encouraged to slam into each other and break each other and sort of absolutely wreck your opposition by the end of it. And it's a lot of fun. Sorry if you can hear rattling. My cat is sitting on the table having a scratch. Yes. So yeah, this is a lot of fun. There was, unfortunately, a bit of controversy over the PC version because, you know, people are stupid and they like to review bomb stuff when things aren't going exactly their way.
Kind of like with Astral Chain right now.
Oh god, yeah, it's ridiculous. But yeah, it's pretty much the same situation with Wreckfest, to be honest. It is because people don't like the fact that this is at a console release that they review bomb the PC version on Steam, because they supposedly dumbed it down by affecting the handling and stuff. Bugbear have actually come out and specifically said, no, we didn't. We haven't done anything to the handling. We've made a few tweaks to the AI, which they've since rolled back. But no, the actual handling is exactly the same as it always was, and people have just been moaning about something that doesn't exist. God, that never happens normally. But yeah, anyway, so hopefully that will die down after a week or two, and people can sort of get on with enjoying the game for what it is, because what it is a lot of fun.
It really does sound like it. It sounds like it sits at that inner... You know, we've had this discussion before on our racing games episode.
Yeah.
But racing games is just really just a blind spot for me. It's something I never get into.
Yeah.
And what it really takes for me to get into racing games is this kind of racing game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just something that's ridiculous and like balls to the wall fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And this... There are sort of vaguely realistic elements to this, but it doesn't tip too far in that direction. Like, I kind of liken the handling to sort of things like sort of the Project Gotham series. So it's got a kind of arcadey feel to the handling, but there's also you have to slow down for corners. Mm-hmm. But it's not like a Forza Motorsport where you need to slow down to 20 miles an hour to go around the corner. It is just you have to use the brakes a bit more than you might do normally.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fun. Definitely well worth checking out, and it seems to be being responded to pretty well by a lot of critics and streamers and YouTubers and stuff as well. So hopefully it will have a long and happy life from this point onwards. So
fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely. So the second thing I've been playing is Senran Kagura Peach Beach Splash, which I know you've been curious to hear about. So at the moment over on
Teach
MoeGamer.net, the cover game feature is the Senran Kagura series, specifically the games from Bon Appetit onwards, which are ones that I've played a bit in some cases, or haven't played at all in the case of Peach Splash onwards. And I just wanted to give each of them a bit of attention and a bit of love and that sort of thing. So Peach Splash has been sitting on my shelf for 2 years now, so I thought it was probably high time I actually played it. And I've been having a lot of fun with it. And so, if you're unfamiliar, then Senran Kagura, up until this point, had sort of its first few installments had been various different evolutions of the beat-em-up formula. So the first game was a 2D side-on brawler, a bit like sort of Streets of Rage and so on. Shinobi Versus, which was on Vita, was a 3D one, which was sort of arena-based combat against a combination of hordes of enemies and occasional, but not occasional, quite pretty frequent boss fights against the major characters. Then we had Bon Appetit, which actually completely went in another direction and became a rhythm game about cooking, which I've written about on MoeGamer recently. Then we had Estival Versus, which kind of returned to the Shinobi Versus formula, but kind of improved the mechanics considerably. So there's a lot more of a almost sort of fighting game feel to Estival Versus, in that the encounters with the boss characters, you can't get through them with hack and slash. You have to use some sort of proper interesting tactics based on character matchups and abilities and that sort of thing. So there was a significant improvement in Estival Versus. Peach Splash is another one that went in a different direction. So this is a third-person shooter based around the idea of water gun fights. And so naturally this drew quite a few comparisons to stuff like Splatoon and stuff when it first came out.
Right.
It is not really much like Splatoon at all, in that it is more focused on combat than Splatoon is. So Splatoon is mostly about sort of area control and stuff, and combat is kind of an incidental part of that, whereas Peach Splash is very combat centric. So I've only played 2 of the main story arcs so far, but so far what it seems that you have is you have a combination of things. It kind of takes the basic format of Shinobi Versus and Estival Versus, and then swaps out the beat-em-up mechanics for third-person shooter mechanics. So you will tend to have a mission that will throw a horde of enemies at you, and then you might have a boss fight against either an individual or another team or something like that. So, and you work your way through the story, working through a series of this sort of thing. And then there's occasional breaks for sort of other kinds of objectives, like this one where you have to go and put out fires with your water guns and that sort of thing. This is sort of the premise for this game. Sounds like not the sort of thing that would have sort of necessarily particularly in-depth or detailed story, but one of the nice things about Senran Kagura is that these characters are now so well defined that they can tell interesting stories with them in unusual contexts. So they do this with Bon Appetit with the cooking competition, and they do it with Peach Splash as well. So Peach Splash is obviously kind of leading up to Senran Kagura 7, which is still in development at the time of recording, but I suspect from the way Peach Splash is going, that is probably going to be the last one. Because a lot of Peach Splash's story so far has been about characters sort of wondering what's going to happen next. So, like in Hanzo's story, you've got Ikaruga worrying about her graduation and worrying about having to leave her friends behind. In Gessen's story, you've got Shiki. She gets an offer from a shinobi school overseas, and she has to decide whether she's going to go and accept that offer or if she's going to stay with her friends and that sort of thing. So there's all sorts of conflicts with the characters over deciding whether they're going to keep things as they are or if they're going to move on to different places and so on. And this is all going alongside what is happening with the tournament, and sort of the battling in the tournament is sort of helping them come to terms with that sort of thing and sort of gather their shinobi energy and that sort of thing. And then there is a kind of an overarching meta plot that is actually relevant to the whole series as well, but I won't spoil that for the minute. So
Shiki can't leave me. let's just be clear about that.
No, I feel quite the same way. Yeah. It wouldn't be the same without Shiki at all. So the actual gameplay, what you have is each time you do a mission, you pick a character, and then you pick a deck of cards for them as well. And that deck of cards can have 3 pet cards, and then it can have, I think it's like 5 or 6 skill cards. And then what these do is that during battle, you will draw 3 of those cards, and they will charge up gradually over the course of you playing normally. Each card has a cost, and the cost represents how long it takes to fill up. So you draw 3 of these cards at the start of the match. When it's fully charged, you can use it, and that card will have some sort of effect. So some of them are directly offensive, so they work a bit like the ninja arts in the beat-em-up Senran Kaguras. Some of them are supportive ones that will like give you a shield or drop a shield that you can stay behind or heal you or that sort of thing. And then when you use a card, you draw another one out from your deck. So you keep cycling around these cards and charging them up and using them as special abilities. So those are kind of almost as important as running around avoiding shots and making use of your weapon to defeat enemies and so on. So it adds a really interesting twist on the standard third-person shooter formula in that you're not just sort of aiming at stuff and shooting, you're sort of deciding when is the best time to make use of these cards as well. And then there's an extensive metagame around these cards, so like you can level the cards up, you can collect new ones, you get new card packs from completing missions and so on. And so like there's like something like 850 of these cards altogether to collect. A lot of them have the same function as each other, but sort of like different rarities of the same character, for example, will have like a more effective version of the same ability. So for example, if you get a 1-star Minori card, for example, that will be sort of a heal of about 10% of your life. But if you get a 3-star one, that will be like heal 30% of your life and so on. And you can then level that card up and make it more effective and that sort of thing. So and
I assume the art changes on the card, just like in like mobile phone card games.
Yes, absolutely. So, like everything can be leveled up. So you can level up your characters, you can level up your weapons, you can level up your pet cards, you can level up your skills. So there is a lot of leveling to do in this game if you want to. And because it's sort of a team-based game, even in single player, you need to sort of make sure that your teammates are loaded out with an appropriate set of cards as well. And this becomes particularly apparent in actually something that I'm going to talk about in the third segment of this episode, because there's a boss fight that was particularly striking to me in this, so I'll talk a bit more about that later. But yeah, it is important to not just focus on yourself, but also to make sure that all of your teammates have an appropriate loadout of cards and weapons as well, because
how thematically appropriate.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Senran Kagura ethos.
Exactly. So yeah, I've been really enjoying it so far, and there is an absolute shitload of content in this game. So just the basic story mode, there are 40 missions in total for like the basic story mode, so 10 for each of the schools. Then there's like a final arc, a bit like they do in Shinobi Versus and Estival Versus. So once you've completed those 4, you then do like a final story. Then alongside that, there's a series of things called Paradise episodes, which are a bit like the Shinobi Girls Heart thing in the Versus games. So these are like shorter stories that focus on an individual character or a small group of characters. And this is where you sort of get the opportunity to spend a bit of time with characters who you don't really see in the main story. So some of like the girls from the mobile game New Wave who appear in Peach Beach Splash, they like get some of their own stories in these Paradise episodes. There's one with Rin and Daidoji. Also, all sorts of interesting combinations of characters in there as well. Yeah, I thought you might be. And then on top of that, there's a straight sort of league mode as well. So you can sort of go straight into almost an Unreal Tournament style league of battles where you just pick a team of your favourite Shinobi, load them up with your weapons and cards that you've leveled appropriately, and then go through a series of increasingly difficult battles and so on as well. So you can play it as sort of like a straight third-person shooter as well. And then on top of all that, there is multiplayer as well. So I don't know how active multiplayer is these days. I suspect maybe not that much, but the Senran Kagura series is quite an active community online, so it's quite possible that there are still people playing. But to be honest, even if you never touch the multiplayer, there is so much single player stuff in here that you will not be bored.
That's what I was really hoping to hear from you. So I've sat on this game, like I don't own it, but I've always been interested in it, like both aesthetically and from like a gameplay perspective. But classic, just like the websites were bad at talking about it, and when it came out, it just kind of like dropped with all the reverberation of a wet fart and then disappeared. So like nobody talked about it when it was out. So I had no idea that there was this much of a heavy single player component. Now that I know that there's so much for me to do without diving into multiplayer with all these RPG elements and character building and card collecting, like I'm super stoked to get a copy of this now.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it. Yes. So there is really a lot of stuff to enjoy in here, and so it's probably going to take me a while to get through, but I'm hoping to at least get through enough of it to be able to write about it sort of this week at the time you listen to this recording, but we'll see how I get on. But I've been really enjoying that so far, so that's well worth a look.
I love these characters, so I'm always looking for new ways to interact with them.
Yes, definitely. This is. I've talked about this several times, but this is like a real strength of the series, is that these characters are so well defined at this point that they just transcend their original context. They are a cast of virtual actors at this point, and sort of so you can throw them into different contexts, and it does make perfect sense, even if it sounds ridiculous, and it's great. So yes, more on that on MoeGamer.net in the coming week or so, all being well. And after that, I'll be moving on to Burst Renewal, which is a remake of the first 3DS game, only in the second timeline, because it's all terribly confusing. I do actually think I kind of get it now. It's like I didn't get it until I played Peach Beach Splash, and there's just like one event in the middle of Peach Beach Splash. I was like, okay, so that's what's going on. So I kind of understand it now, but again, I won't spoil it for anyone for the minute. But yes, so up until this point, I have been doubting that there are two timelines in Senran Kagura, but there are. So anyway, right. So that's mostly all I've been playing for now. So I think at this point we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some boss fights. So see you in a moment.
新しいメガネとかではないか。
だとしたら夢がないわね。ま、今ってそもそもつまらない女だしね。
曜日、お前のダジャレの方がつまらないよ。
あ、それは言えてるかも。言えていないわよ。ってそれじゃあ雪男じゃない。どうよ。
Welcome back. For our third segment today, we wanted to just sort of kick back and have a fairly lightweight, fun discussion. And we thought we'd talk about some of our favourite boss battles. Now, just before we came on microphone, we were just talking about whether or not we should focus on sort of mid-game bosses or last bosses. What I've actually got in my notes is I've got a kind of a mix of both, really. Because in some cases, some of the games that I want to talk about today, the only boss is the last boss. So we're not going to sort of make a huge distinction between the two here, but we will probably do a separate episode specifically on final bosses, especially those that are mechanically distinct from earlier bosses in the game at some point in the future. But for now, we're just going to talk about bosses in general, whether they're final or regular. So, all right, do you want to kick off, Chris? What have you got?
Yeah, so I tried to kind of go in chronological order, kind of shaping...
Yeah, I tried to do the same.
Shaping a history of like my love of boss battles. So the first one I have as being like a real standout boss, and I think this is one that resonates with a lot of people of our generation, is the dragon from Mega Man 2.
Right.
That's like one of the like iconic bosses of the Nintendo era. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I was obsessed with dragons and robots. Yeah. And so this is a giant dragon robot. so it was pretty great. It's just this huge sprite, right? And we know now, based on the way sprites were built on the original Nintendo, that a lot of the sprites in Mega Man were actually multiple sprites put together. Yeah. Which is one of like the amazing things. Mega Man himself is two sprites.
Yeah.
Because he's actually more colors than Nintendo would technically, than NES architecture would allow a sprite to be. So a lot of the Mega Man bosses are actually composed of multiple sprites kind of layered, and especially these big ones with so many colors. So it's just this huge spectacle. And I remember it has a very cinematic presentation that really sets it apart from kind of other bosses. So this is like in the Dr. Wily stages, like you're in the last stretches of Mega Man 2, you've been busting your ass to get here, and it reaches this point where, first of all, the music and the level is iconic. The Dr. Wily stage music from Mega Man 2 is like one of the most, like, often remixed, like, game tracks ever.
Yeah.
So this incredible music's playing, you're climbing this structure, you get to this dark room, And it's immediately one of the most hellacious things in Mega Man is when you have the single block platforms just over a pit of darkness. Yeah. So you just start jumping like block to block across this black expanse of death, right? You miss one of these jumps, you're dead. You get a couple jumps in, the background fades away, and all of a sudden this giant robot dragon appears on the left-hand side, starts chasing you across this pit. It's this just amazing introduction that, like, from a level of, like, cinematic presentation was, like, not something that happened a lot on the Nintendo because of the resources, obviously. So eventually you reach a point where you're jumping across these blocks and you reach an end point where there's just this structure of only 3 blocks. Then you hit the structure of 3 blocks, and then the oh shit moment happens, right? The dragon stops, the boss health bar goes like Mega Man style, builds up on the right hand side, music changes to boss music, and you realize, holy shit, I have to fight this thing. And you do. And you have to fight it. You have to fight this giant robot dragon with only 3 platforms that are only as wide as your character, as your only footing.
Yeah.
Now, like, in retrospect, like, as a man in his 30s, and, like, watching footage of this battle again, it's a really simple fight. The boss has only 2 attacks that are relatively easy to dodge. But it isn't just about, like, the difficulty of the fight. It's just about the sheer spectacle of it. Like, this lead up to this fight. And, like, as a kid, this fight's terrifying because these single platform jump sequences in Mega Man are nerve-wracking. And here you've got to combine this tight platform jumping with a boss you're fighting. So he's launching fireballs at you, and you've got to not fall to your death and deal enough damage to kill him. Now we know, because, you know, Mega Man's Mega Man, like, if you use the quick boomerang, like, you can just shred him in seconds. Yeah. But, like, I didn't know this when I was, like, 6. Right? So, the sheer spectacle of this fight is something that always sticks with me.
Yeah. I've not actually seen this before because, as I've said, Mega Man is not a series I know super well at this point. That is an incredibly impressive sprite for the NES.
Oh, yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty stunning. Yeah. No, that sounds really cool. And exactly what you're talking about here. I love, like, little things like sort of when they perfectly time, like the boss bar appearing and building up and stuff like that. That can be so effective if you do it right. Yeah, I love that kind of thing. The first one I want to talk about is not especially a good boss, but it sticks in my mind probably because I think it was the first boss I encountered in gaming. And that was in Menace on the Atari ST. So Menace is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up developed by DMA Design, who would then later go on to develop Lemmings and then subsequently become Rockstar, who developed Grand Theft Auto, of course. But yeah, back in the Atari ST era, they made a bunch of cool games, and one of these was Menace. The first boss in this game, I still can't beat today. Because, like, the first level is not horrendously difficult or anything. Menace is a shoot-'em-up that sort of has quite an interesting power-up system. So, like, you shoot a bunch of enemies, and they will drop a block that is initially just worth points. And if you continue shooting that block, you then get various different power-ups depending on the number of times that you shoot it. And so ideally, by the end of the level, you want to have equipped your ship with, there's a cannon you can put on the bottom that fires bullets, and there's a laser gun you can put on the top that fires out a straight line laser across the screen. So eventually you can have sort of 3 separate shots going at the same time. The unfortunate thing is that both the cannon at the bottom and the laser at the top have limited ammunition, so you have to keep collecting these power-ups as you go through the level in order to keep them fully charged. And ideally what you want is for them to be fully charged by the time you reach this boss at the end of the level, which is quite difficult to do, and is probably the main reason I can't beat this boss. But the reason this boss is memorable to me is because it has like you talked about with Mega Man there, it has an extremely threatening lead up to it. So you're playing through this level, you got this music playing in the background, and it's sort of like fairly conventional shoot 'em up action. Then the music fades out, you're sort of flying through this fairly straight line, you know something is about to happen. You get this incredibly threatening digitized voice going, danger, danger, danger. And then this massive thing that is like sort of a brain with tentacles poking out of it appears at the side of the screen, starts looking at you with this sort of dribbling eye. This was a game very much designed in sort of the R-Type and Gradius mold, so it's very, very kind of organic. It sort of sits there, and then it just throws this absolute torrent of what appears to be yellow sperm at you repeatedly, and it's very difficult to avoid these, and you've got to shoot it in the eye, and I just can't do it. But it is an incredibly memorable moment, because that was sort of the first boss that I encountered. And when I sort of think of bosses, when someone just mentions a boss in a game, that is always one of the first ones that I think of. So like I say, it's not necessarily a particularly good boss, because I suspect part of the reason that I can't defeat it are that its attack patterns, they're not really sort of choreographed. There's a lot of randomization to them, and so that sometimes puts you in a position where it is literally impossible to avoid taking damage. Menace is a game where you have a health bar rather than you get destroyed with one hit, and so to a certain extent the game is designed on the assumption that you will take some damage. But yeah, it's just very difficult. So from that perspective, it's not a great boss, but from my own sort of gaming history perspective, it's important to me just because it was a very early one that I came across.
Yeah, a good boss is memorable. A great boss is memorable and beatable.
Yes. Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, so there's that. So, all right, so where are you moving on to next?
So I tried not to focus on any one system too much. I could probably just do a Nintendo bosses episode, right? But so I'll move on to Super Nintendo. And for Super Nintendo, I have chosen the Dark Lich from Secret of Mana, mainly because Secret of Mana is hot right now because the physical copy of Mana Collection just came out. But the Dark Lich is the second to last boss of Secret of Mana. And it's one of those situations where arguably, because as we just kind of alluded to, sometimes in games what happens is that the last boss isn't really much of a boss at all. There's kind of a fun gimmick that's narrative related to beating it.
Yeah.
So the Dark Lich is the last boss in Secret of Mana that's just a pure boss battle with no gimmick.
Yeah.
Right. It's the last true boss that you follow the game's normal mechanics. So he's arguably the true final boss of the game, because you just have to survive and bring to bear everything you've learned from the entirety of the game to defeat him. From a narrative perspective, there's insane stakes, because it's Secret of Mana. The original Secret of Mana has 3 characters, right? The boy, who's usually called Randy, or Rando, one or the other. The girl with the blonde girl, who's usually called Prim, and the sprite, who's usually called Popoi. But it's also one of those games you can name the characters whatever you want to name. But the Dark Lich is a evil sorcerer who ends up possessing Dialek, which is Prim's boyfriend. And kills him and takes his body. So emotionally, it's a tremendously high stakes fight, because you're essentially just your boyfriend's dead and now you've got to put him out of his misery, because he's possessed by an evil sorcerer. So it's this massive screen filling sprite of this skeleton in flowing purple robes with the cosmos. This is 16-bit, so I'm obviously embellishing a little bit, but space exists in the void inside his robes that you don't see his rib cage. It's space, winking stars. It's just this incredibly ethereal presentation of just this death incarnate monster, and he just brings all all the most powerful versions of every spell to bear against you. Every time he hits you, it's a quarter of your health gone. And And the sprite itself, as was necessary at the time for sprites this large, is composed of many pieces. So like his head is a separate piece, his hands are a separate piece, and they're all just moving in a way that wasn't super common at the time for a sprite to move. Like his head kind of sways back and forth and follows the movement of your characters in a way that it's only like in retrospect maybe like 3 different turning animations, but just that level of added interactivity makes him seem so alive compared to other monsters you fight, and it's just hugely expressive. And he disappears and phases through the floor, and his like head and his hands come out of the floor. And the music, when you fight him, he has his own special fight theme. It's you only hear this track when you fight him. It is one of the most unnerving and chaotic pieces of 16-bit music I think I've ever heard. It's just pure terror and panic. And like you're in this fight with tremendous emotional stakes against this giant, terrifying, and very, like I mentioned, alive-looking sprite. Just doing massive damage. You're burning through every spell in your catalog to try to figure out how to damage him. Like, pro tip, it's light, because he's the Dark Lich. But, like, and this music is just, like, throwing you into an absolute, like, anxiety fit while you're fighting him. It's just the conglomeration of all these perfect design and artistic elements making you feel this fight in, like, the depths of your chest while you're doing it.
Yeah. Oh, I love
and
that
I can just remember as a kid, like, my friends and I, like, having a save file right at the end of Secret of Mana, and just, like, every other Friday we'd have a sleepover, and we would just kick the sleepover off by, like, beating Secret of Mana so we could hear, like, the Dark Lich music.
Yes. Oh.
Like, I just, so many memories associated with this specific boss battle.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one who kept saves before cool boss battles.
Yeah, oh no, pretty much any of the games I'm talking about today that featured a save feature, I had saves before.
Yeah.
That was one of my, like, criteria, and I was like, what boss battles will I choose to discuss? It's usually ones I had save files, like, queued up before.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Well, I will look forward to encountering him at some point then, because I do have the lovely physical copy of Collection of Mana now, so I'm looking forward to exploring that. All right, next one I want to talk about is from Wolfenstein 3D Spear of Destiny, which was the sort of quasi-sequel to Wolfenstein 3D that actually came out as a packaged commercial release rather than a shareware release. And the boss that specifically springs to mind in this one is the first one who appears on floor 5, who is called Transgross, who I don't think is a name that you would get away with today, but yeah, this is part of the Gross family who appears throughout the series. So in total, the Gross family includes Hans Gross, who appears in the original Wolfenstein 3D as the boss of the first episode. There is Gretel Gross, who is boss of episode 5 of Wolfenstein 3D. There is Mans, Pans, and Fans Gross, who are bosses of the secret floor on episode 6 of Wolfenstein 3D. And then there's Transgross, who is the first boss in Spear of Destiny. I found this one particularly interesting for a number of reasons. So, Spear of Destiny was a game that my friends and I played before we played the original Wolfenstein 3D, and I think it was our first ever first-person shooter experience as a result. And so this was a new kind of game for us. So this was something that we hadn't experienced before. This is something that we found really exciting because it was this new kind of game. We got very, very immersed in the whole atmosphere and use of sound, music, and stuff in Wolfenstein 3D, which obviously looks quite primitive today, but at the time it was great. So sort of the combination of that ad-lib music and that stereo sound blaster sound was just brilliant for the time. And when you reach floor 5 in Spear of Destiny, you get this track from the soundtrack called "The Ultimate Challenge" starts playing. Now, in retrospect, a lot of Bobby Prince's old music for these old shareware games, for stuff like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom, although a lot of it is considered to be iconic these days, from a modern perspective, a lot of it isn't terribly interesting from a compositional perspective. Like Bobby Prince fucking loves his 12-bar blues sequence, but the interesting thing about the Ultimate Challenge is that this is a genuinely cool piece of music, because it sort of gradually builds up, and it's got this wonderful feeling of lurking horror and lingering tension to it, but on top of that, it sort of occasionally sort of shifts into this feeling of like you're this badass and you can triumph over whatever is coming your way, but also you might die in the process.
Yeah. See, what's cool about the Dark Lich theme that I was just talking about is it has none of that.
Yeah.
It's just pure. You're going to die here. This is where you die.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about boss design in Wolfenstein 3D is that rather than what we tend to get in a lot of games these days, which is that bosses are often in their own self-contained area, in Wolfenstein 3D, a boss would be part of a level.
Oh, that's so cool. I don't remember that.
So you would typically have to sort of fight your way through a level in the normal way before you encounter the boss, and then the boss would be the last part of that level. And this was the case in all the way through Spear of Destiny as well. So you had to fight your way through sort of the usual sort of maze and Nazis coming your way in this level. And then towards the end, you come into this area that is quite sort of disorienting in some ways, because it's kind of laid out in a symmetrical way. And so it's, after a little while, it gets quite hard to keep track of which direction you're going, which direction you're facing. And they just sort of plonk him at one end of this area. So it's not like you open the door and he's there. It's like you go into this area and there's like a few treasures around, there's a bit of ammunition to pick up, and then suddenly you go around a corner and there's this massive thing yells something in German at you, and you're like, oh shit, what do I do now? So mechanically speaking, like most of the bosses in Wolfenstein 3D, he was pretty much just a bullet sponge. But it was the combination of the clever level design, the excellent use of sound for the time, and just the context in which you fought him just made that a really memorable encounter. And it's sort of like it really sort of set the tone for the rest of Spear of Destiny. And so the other boss fights all kind of had that same thing where you sort of encounter a boss as part of your navigation through a level and that sort of thing. And it just made them really memorable, despite the fact that they weren't necessarily mechanically the most interesting things, but they were memorable to fight regardless, and beatable.
Yeah, I don't remember boss fights in Wolfenstein, but it's been a long time since I engaged in Wolfenstein from a serious standpoint.
Yeah, but they are cool bosses actually, because they distinguish themselves very much from the standard enemies. So most of the standard enemies in Wolfenstein are sort of kind of grounded in reality. So you've like got your German officers and your SS officers and and that kind of thing. And so they're human. I mean, they're still Nazis, so you still want to shoot them, but they are humans. Spear of Destiny does sort of introduce zombies and stuff a little bit later on as well, but still most of the enemies you're fighting are human. And it distinguishes the bosses in Wolfenstein 3D by most of those sprites are sort of twice the width of the standard enemy sprites. Mm-hmm. And so they're all these really sort of hulking, muscular, huge enemies who appear. They all have their own custom sound sets. They all have their own sort of unique ways of attacking that are different from the standard enemies and so on. So, yeah, it does really distinguish them. So that was a really cool thing about it. But you encounter them relatively infrequently throughout the course of the game. So in the original Wolfenstein 3D, you would only find a boss at the end of an episode. So that was like once every 10 levels. Okay. In Spear of Destiny, it was once every 5 levels and so on. So they weren't sort of something that you came across super regularly, but it was always a significant moment when you did.
Sure. Looking at the Wolfenstein wiki, it is heavily implied that Transgrossa is Transgrossa because he is transhuman. He is the first character you encounter that appears to have undergone cybernetic enhancements. And he has a heavily digitized speech sample implying that he may be robotic or cybernetic.
Yes, so that's sort of a running theme in Wolfenstein is sort of enhanced humans. So sort of part of the plot is sort of like Hitler enhancing himself and the guy creating these zombies and so on. Like if you look at Transgross's sprite, he's like got spikes on his shoulders. It looks like his arms are made of chain guns rather than him just holding them. Yeah, so yeah, that's quite a common thing. And sort of the famous boss in Wolfenstein 3D is Hitler in a robot suit at the end of the third episode and so on. So, yeah. Yeah. But that sort of continued in the other bosses as well. It was kind of anachronistic in a lot of ways, but it was a cool, distinctive part of Wolfenstein, certainly. All right, what's next for you?
What is next for me? I don't have a lot to say about this one, but I just wanted to mention it because it's very memorable to me. It's not really special from like a mechanical standpoint, but Atma Weapon from Final Fantasy VI.
Oh yeah,
So Final Fantasy VI, from a narrative standpoint, is kind of split into two very distinct halves, right? So like, you have the world of order, and then the world is destroyed, and then you have the world of ruin. And Atma Weapon is essentially considered kind of the final boss of the world of order before you move on to the world of ruin. So it's just this massive boss, once again, just a tremendously detailed sprite, a very challenging fight. Nothing mechanically special about it, really, but he has his own music, right? And that's all it took for me to be like memorable for a boss. It's just like the holy shit moment of special music.
Yeah.
So I have nothing really to say in super detail about Atma Weapon. Just the music was incredible, so that fight always sticks with me.
Yeah, no, I can get behind that. The whole sort of unique music thing is always something that sort of, going back to our first episode, gives me the goosebump effect.
Yeah, so. Goosebump effect is super important. Now, one that I have that I can talk great length about from a presentational and mechanical standpoint is Shinobi 3 on the Genesis.
Okay.
So stage 3 of Shinobi 3 is called quote-unquote Body Weapon. And this is also a name I usually extend to the boss of this stage.
Yeah.
So Shinobi 3 on the Genesis is just a beautiful game. It's like the Genesis, like, chugging on like all cylinders. Musical, presentation, it's just the best of the best. It's just Sega at their peak in the 16-bit era. And what Body Weapon is an incredible example of, once again, kind of what we have been talking about with a lot of these bosses, is a lot of these most memorable bosses have a tremendous lead-up.
Yeah.
And Body Weapon is incredible because the level is the classic, like, bio lab infiltration. Mm-hmm. So, like, the first half of the stage is very typical, like, you're infiltrating the lab and, like, you know, you walk by giant glass cylinders that have the enemies in them and they shatter and then the enemies come jumping out and harass you and they're like gross, like, brain things with like hoppy legs on them. And everything's, but you're in like a clean lab and then you fight the mid-boss of the level, which is just like a horde of these like hoppy brain things. Then your scene transitions and you go to the second part of the level. And the second part of the level is like the depths of the lab where everything has gone wrong. And it is the classic special, like, organic rampant growth aesthetic stage where everything just looks like it's made of like meat and poop. Like, everything is just covered in like brown and orange, like throbbing veins and like horrifying like masses of out of control cancerous flesh. And it's gross. And as soon as you step foot in there, and I will read my exact notes, and I'm going to read it with the typo because I think it's better with the typo. Throughout part 2 of the stage, there is a giant Cthulhu Zombo-looking motherfucker in the background harassing you with lasers. So like, he emerges in the background, and as you're making your way through the level, jumping over things, fighting enemies, there's also a reticule, like a green reticule sight moving around, and if that locks onto you, you get blasted with a laser.
Yeah.
So you have to stay continuously moving because this guy just keeps firing lasers at you from the background. Surprise, surprise, when you get to the end of the stage, there's special music, and this thing emerges from the ground with his weird, like, betentacled face, and he's massive, so, like, he just emerges from, like, the pool of meat and poop, and, like, you're only fighting his, like, neck and head and his hands that, like, emerge. And it's this massive sprite that's, like, once again, just extremely notable for its level of detail and like finite amounts of animation contained within the sprites. So they've animated like the veins all over his like exposed brain and stuff. So like they pulsate and like neon light like travels through them, and like the little like pustules and like growths on his head like throb and convulse, and like there's little like craters in his head that just like emit like blobs that you have to dodge, and they sphincter like contract and open to like shoot stuff at you, and like with like a couple frames of animation. And he's got one weak point, and it's his teeny tiny little eyes.
Yeah.
And if you've ever played Shinobi before, you know that like you have to be pinpoint accurate with those shuriken shots. So it's just extremely unnerving because there's this techno-electric, like, horror music playing, and you're fighting this total monstrosity. And to this point, all you've really fought is, like, robots and ninjas and like, samurais and, like, soldiers. So, like, here's this just otherworldly monstrosity, and you're dodging his hand swipes, and then every now and then, he charges up and he shoots this laser blast out of his mouth, because it's the laser he's been harassing you with from the background, but now it's at point blank range, so it takes up like a quarter of the screen, and you've got to dodge that while dodging his hands, while also dodging like the poop like rocks he launches at you out of his forehead. It's just so much, and it's like, and he's scary looking. It's a boss fight, man. It's massive build up, and then he's gonna kill you the first time. Like, he's totally gonna kill you the first time.
Yeah.
And I love him so much.
Oh, that sounds
it's
great.
Unbelievable.
Shinobi 3's one from the most recent Mega Drive collection. I haven't played a huge amount, but yeah, I'm definitely gonna have to look into that a bit more now.
Shinobi 3 is a game of pure spectacle.
Yeah.
So like there's like a surfboard chase level where you're like fighting flying giant robots from a surfboard, and just there's the horse levels. It just every turn this game is throwing just incredible stage spectacle at you. It just feels like the world's most idealized ninja action movie that you get to participate in. It's amazing.
Oh, sounds great. Sounds great. I'll have to explore that further then, for sure. All right. Talking of poop, I feel like it would probably be remiss of me in a discussion of boss fights to not talk about the Great Mighty Pooh and Conker.
I knew you were going to drop the Great Mighty Pooh. I knew it.
Now, if you have never played either Conker's Bad Fur Day or Conker Live and Reloaded on Xbox, this is the part that everyone remembers from Conker. There are several boss fights in Conker, and they're all actually quite interesting boss fights, but this is the one that sticks in everyone's mind for several reasons. The main one being that it is a piece of interactive musical theatre.
Yes.
So you come into this area. You're already in a giant mountain of shit, so you're already quite familiar with the fact that this is going to get scatological. Because it already has. But yeah, this massive thing with sweet corn for teeth comes slowly rising out of this pool of liquid shit in the corner of the stage. And then he starts singing at you. And there's like little lyrics at the bottom of the screen, and there's a lump of shit bouncing along the lyrics, so you can sing along with it if you want to. And then sort of in between each verse of the song, you have to fight him, and the way you fight him is by when he bursts out the ground and starts singing at you again, you have to stand on a special pad. It's like most of Conker's action is about finding these context sensitive pads and pressing a button on them, which will give you the item you need to do something specific. And in this case, you stand on this pad, it gives you a lump of toilet paper, you throw it down his throat, and that deals damage to him, and then you repeat this process several times until you can finally flush him away once and for all. And so, again, mechanically, it's not a terribly complicated fight. But just the context, the presentation of that battle is still some of Rare's finest work. It is just a beautifully presented thing. It's the fact that it takes it takes a fight against a giant sentient lump of shit so utterly seriously that I just love it. I love it so much. Conker is such a great game. I mean, again, mechanically, it is not Rare's strongest game. Some of the humour has aged better than others, but just that sequence in there. If you play one bit of Conker, either on N64 or on Xbox, make it that bit because it's something special. It really is.
The song is in my head way more often than I'd like it to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. me and my friends, we still often greet each other by singing that to each other. So yeah, it is something that has stuck in our head ever since we originally played it on the N64. So, and we all know all of the words.
Yeah,
all of them without having to look them up. We know the whole song all the way through. Yeah. So there's that. All right, moving on from there and sort of staying on the theme of disgusting organic things. I want some of the final bosses I wanted to talk about. I actually wanted to take these as a group, which is the final bosses of the various Trauma Center games.
Oh yeah.
And so Trauma Center, if you're unfamiliar, was a series from Atlas, which appears to be defunct now, unfortunately. But it started on DS and then moved to Wii. And so there's several installments. There's 2 on DS, and there's 3 on Wii. One of the ones on Wii is a remake of one of the DS ones, and then the other 2 Wii ones are completely original ones. And Trauma Center is a game about medicine, mostly surgery, but there in the last game, Trauma Team, there is also a bit of like diagnostic medicine, forensic investigations, first response, and that sort of thing as well. So it sort of expands on there all the way through. But the interesting thing about Trauma Center is it's sort of sci-fi medicine. So all of the games in the series tend to start out with fairly realistic procedures, albeit executed in that phrase you love so much, action surgery format, which is so Trauma Center is kind of an action puzzle game basically, where you have to sort of use the right tools for the right jobs and sort of draw gestures on screen using either the stylus on the DS or the Wii remote on the screen on the Wii. And so it's all about recognizing different symptoms and knowing what to do about those symptoms. And over the course of all of the games, they tend to involve sort of stories of like bioterrorism and that sort of thing. And so each game tends to have like a sort of main villain disease, if you like. That by the end of each of those games, you defeat that disease. You sort of defeat like the disease in the patient zero of the respective the respective thing. And each of these encounters are spectacularly and unusually dramatic for a game supposedly about medicine, in that they sort of have incredible dramatic music. You're sort of like looking at someone's heart and there's like sort of a choir of Gregorian monks chanting in the background and sort of orchestral hits and like thumping bass lines and that sort of thing. So like the music for the original Trauma Center game was done by Shoji Meguro, who is the guy who does a lot of the Shin Megami Tensei series, for example. Mm-hmm. And then the subsequent games were done by Atsushi Kitajo, I think his name is, who has obviously taken a lot of inspiration from Shoji Meguro. He uses a lot of similar sounds and that sort of thing in his music. And yeah, so these final confrontations in the various Trauma Center games, they are incredibly dramatic. They are proper final bosses. They always have intense actions, and all of them have some sort of incredibly meaningful final action that unfolds in complete silence. And so this is a proper sort of shivers down the spine moment. So like the last thing you do in each of these games is always the music will fade out. You will be in complete silence, and you just get the impression that everyone else in this operating theatre is looking at you going,
yeah, breath held.
Go on, do it. And yeah, so and yeah, it's just incredible. So like it's always like sort of like in the first one, you literally stop time so that you can inject the serum into this disease, and then the other ones you're sort of doing various things to sort of remove the disease from patient zero and that sort of thing. And it's always sort of like the disease is mutated into some sort of horrible slobbering monster and that sort of thing. And it's just fantastic. It's the most unrealistic thing about those games, but it's also one of the best things about those games. It's just such a wonderful sense of closure. It's great. Yeah, so the Trauma Center games in general are fantastic, and I would love to see them make a comeback. But for the moment, you are limited to DS and Wii. But yeah, if you have the opportunity to try them, I strongly recommend it because they are great. All right, what have you got next?
I'm going to go into one of the very greats. I'm going to go into Symphony of the Night.
Okay.
Yeah, because I would be remiss if I didn't have some Castlevania up in this business. So, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, of course, one of the most memorable things about it is that it has the dual castle structure, right? Like, if you've played the game right, and you've done everything right, you get to play through the castle, and then you get to play through the upside-down castle. And one of the most interesting things about the upside-down castle, from a design perspective and kind of a thematic perspective, is the standard castle all kind of plays towards what Castlevania has always done, which is kind of a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek exploration of kind of horror in more of like a cheesy sense, like vampires and Frankensteins and demons, oh my, and like a little bit of mythology. One of the things that Symphony of the Night did very subtly, but if you're a fan of like horror and like macabre narratives, you'll notice after a while, is the Upside Down Castle makes a very distinct shift into like genuine horror.
Yes.
So the Upside Down Castle is very disturbing. The music is more ambient and scary. Less triumphant and rock and roll fueled. The enemies become more unsettling, and this is especially true of the bosses.
Yeah.
So there are two bosses from the Upside Down Castle I want to talk about. The first of which is Beelzebub, which is not a terribly challenging boss fight, but a super memorable boss fight. And also what's interesting about the Beelzebub boss fight is it takes place in the first boss fight room, but in the Upside Down Castle. So like, the first boss fight of Castlevania Symphony of the Night is the classic Slogrun Gaibon battle, which is also one of the second to last bosses of Castlevania 4. And it takes place in a room much, much larger than it really needs to be for that fight. Yeah. And it almost leaves you questioning, why is this room so big? You're also questioning, why is there a giant pentagram scrawled on the wall behind here? Yeah. And really, it's interesting from a design perspective, because it tells you that when they were putting this game together, they were conceiving of the Upside Down Castle while they were conceiving of the regular castle as well. Because this room was always conceived clearly as a staging ground for the Beelzebub fight. Because Beelzebub is massive. He does not fit in one screen. And what he is just a giant rotting corpse suspended from the walls and the ceiling by these rattling chains. His primary method of attack is just these disgusting bloated flies that harass you while you just try to chip away and damage him. And as you chip away and damage him, his just like disgusting rotting limbs break off and like fall. Yeah. And it's terribly anticlimactic. Like when you kill him, just the last bit of his corpse falls on the, and like it's over. It's just over. It's not really hard. It's just disturbing. And it's one of the fights that's like, we're in the shit now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're in another realm where, like, horror is part of this formula, where the stakes are high, the threats are disturbing, and it's really one of those, like, moments from, like, a narrative and presentational perspective where it's not telegraphed to you. There's no dialogue with the Beelzebub fight. You know, he's not an important story character, but it's just so telling in terms of what it communicates about like the atmosphere and the themes of the game, that like, oh my god, I'm just chipping away at a massive rotting corpse that's bombarding me with the bloat flies that are eating it while like maggots wriggle on him. And like it's a far cry from like, you just fought Scylla and Charybdis from Greek mythology, how cool. And like now we're now we're in a realm where we're literally fighting like one of the demons of the Ars Goetia. And it's almost scary that he doesn't fight back. Like the horror element of just like you're almost putting this thing out of its misery.
Yeah,
it's just really disturbing from like a pure horror and like body terror perspective. And then the other boss is of course one of the most famous Castlevania bosses of all time, which is Grand Falloon, also known as Legion, which is once again in a massive room because this boss is tremendous in size, and it is a giant orb composed of writhing naked human bodies. And he litters the ground with these shambling bodies. So not only are you trying to jump and navigate this massive room space to chip damage away from this giant spectacle of a boss, but these corpses that he's just dropping like they're freaking dandruff flakes are shambling across the floor, and they're occasionally screaming in agony. They don't really damage you or attack you unless you walk into them, because they're literally just forsaken bodies, but you've got to kill them to manage the space in the room.
Yeah.
Once you've chipped away enough of this armor of corpses that surrounds him, what's inside? Just a massive H.P. Lovecraft-inspired, tentacled, otherworldly horror. And your reward for exposing this is, surprise, now you've also got to deal with lasers that are just going to shoot out of these tentacles. It's like the stakes just continue to dial. The whole time there's just cries of agony and pain, and the music is disturbing, and it's just pure spectacle, and it's unsettling, and anytime you're expected to perform reflex-based tasks while you're physically unsettled is a really weird place to be put. So, this boss always... And Grand Falloon's made returns in subsequent Castlevania games just because of its popularity. But, Symphony of the Night, I just remember encountering this thing and being 14 and being like, is this a giant orb of naked bodies? What is going on? Just being mortified.
Yeah.
And that's
great stuff.
So those are the two big ones from Symphony of the Night for me.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's so many in that game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Castlevania's had some fantastic bosses throughout its lifetime. A lot of them make an appearance in the one I can never remember the name of, but the one I really like, the one on the sort of best of Castlevania one on Xbox 360 and PS3, Harmony of Dissonance.
Yeah, I think no.
So Harmony of Dissonance or Harmony of Despair? One of Harmony of Despair, I think. So that one sort of acts as Harmony of Despair. That's the one that's sort of split into discrete levels, and then the focus of each of those levels is making your way to the boss, which is in a specific part of the level, and then defeating that boss. And so it sort of brings in a lot of classic bosses from Castlevania history throughout the course of that. So I think Legion's in there at one point. And there's all sorts of other ones as well that are sort of very memorable. So yeah. All right, great stuff. I've got two more, just to let you know. So if you got a few more, then that's great. I've got specifically two more I want to talk about. The first one I want to mention is actually a slightly more recent one, which is actually an MMO boss, which is Twintania from Final Fantasy XIV.
Oh, yeah.
So Twintania was the hardest super boss in A Realm Reborn when it first came out. So when Final Fantasy XIV had its complete reboot into what it is now, Twintania was the hardest super boss in the main raid dungeon, which was called the Binding Coil of Bahamut. And over the course of sort of pre-Heaven's Ward Final Fantasy XIV, the Binding Coil of Bahamut sort of kind of wrapped up the complete storyline of what happened in Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0. So how the world ended, how that happened, how and sort of how you make sure that isn't going to happen again. And as part of this process, you're sort of finding out about this sort of ancient race of people called the Allagans, who you have sort of been finding bits and pieces out about as you've been progressing through the game. So the Allagans are sort of like the obligatory mysterious ancient race of people who are no longer around, but all sorts of relics of theirs are still sitting around all over the place. And Twintania is a giant dragon who was one of their weapons. And so Twintania shows up. You're sort of exploring various parts of this. It starts as a dig site, but you eventually sort of unearth the fact that, oh shit, Bahamut might be buried down here. So you fight Twintania on Bahamut's hand, basically. So you go in there, and this dragon appears, flies down. This incredibly dramatic music comes on that you've only heard once in the game previously on the sort of true final boss of the main final story dungeon. You've only heard it once, and to be honest, most of the time, by the time you reach that point in the game, you absolutely flatten that boss, so you won't have heard it very much. But by the time you reach Twintania and you hear this music again, you know that this is serious business right now. And so, in its original context, this was sort of the hardest raid in the game. So it required 8 skilled players to know what they were doing. It required them to know sort of what the various attacks that were coming your way were, how to deal with them, when to be in different places, and so on. For those who haven't explored Final Fantasy XIV before, as much as being an MMO, it is very much a game about boss fights. And each of those boss fights is something that is quite heavily choreographed. It's almost... I often kind of liken it to almost shoot-'em-up design in some cases, in that it's very much about being in the right place at the right time, recognizing the safe places to be, and also the best opportunities to actually be able to get in there and do some damage. And so bosses tend to follow a strict phase-based pattern based on how much damage you've done to them, so sort of at various thresholds of hit points that you get them down to, they will change phase and something different will happen. So Twintania was noteworthy, and at the time of its release, it was also one of the most complex fights from a phase-based perspective. So I think there were like 5 phases altogether.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a lot of stuff for people to learn, and that was partly why it was so difficult, because you had to practice each of those phases individually. And obviously, if you fucked up in phase 5, you then had to go and do the first 4 all over again to repeatedly do that until you got everything right in one go. And so there's a lot of stuff in that Twintania fight that kind of became so notorious that it entered the realm of popular folklore in the Final Fantasy XIV community almost.
Okay.
So like you just have to say dive bombs to someone who plays Final Fantasy XIV to send a shiver down their spine, because they're like, oh god, because dive bombs was probably the most difficult mechanic to deal with in that fight. So dive bombs was part of the fight where the boss would actually sort of leave the arena and then sort of randomly appear at the side of the arena, dive across the place, potentially send you slamming back into the wall and usually killing you if it hit you. And so if you fucked up dive bombs, that was normally it for that attempt. And so it was something you really had to get right. But because of the sort of combination of the dramatic music and the narrative context and everything like this was such a cool fight to be part of. And when it was difficult and it was unforgiving, but at the same time it was satisfying, and it was never unfair. So if you messed up, there was always a reason for it. You could always pin down exactly what you'd done wrong.
Sure.
Which is one of the things that Final Fantasy XIV is pretty good at as you go through. So sort of all of the boss fights are completely fair. You just have to know what you're doing. And so that does sort of lead to a certain amount of culture of sort of needing to read up on them or watch videos before you fight them, which is an aspect that I've come to not like quite so much about it. But it is something that the community has always enjoyed quite a bit, and it is sort of a defining part of that game's design. So, and Twintania is a great example of that. And so it's just a really cool fight in context. It's incredibly memorable to me just because it used to be the hardest thing in the game. I never took it down when it was the hardest thing in the game. I took it down a lot later when they sort of made it quite a bit easier to complete. It was still difficult when I did it, and so it was still incredibly satisfying to be able to complete that encounter. But yeah, it's cool that is still there in the game if you want to take it on. I don't know if it's possible to solo it yet. There are some fights that used to take 8 people that you can now solo in Final Fantasy XIV, which is interesting. I don't know if anyone has done Twintania yet. That's not something I've looked into. Theoretically, you should be able to do it now, given the fact that like the item level you are at the end of the game now is something like 500 levels higher than you would have been at the end of Realm Reborn. But there are certain mechanics that are kind of dependent on more than one person being there. So it is a true sort of cooperative thing. So sort of like you have to release people from sort of being trapped in things and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was sort of a true cooperative experience in which everyone had to play their part. So again, not something that would appeal to everyone, but certainly a memorable experience if you kind of engaged with it, if you were there for it, and if you are sort of in the right mindset for it. So that's a very cool one. Okay, so you got two more. Let's have one of them then.
I do. Metal Gear Solid 4, the Metal Gear Rex versus Metal Gear Ray battle.
Okay.
So for Metal Gear fans, Metal Gear Solid 4 is kind of a tremendous game from a narrative and presentational standpoint, right? Because Metal Gear Solid 4 is about kind of the end of Snake's life. Yeah. And, old Snake is whatever, he's got his mustache and he's gray, and like, if you sit still too long or you crouch too long, he like rubs his lower back. Like it's a game about aging, and it's a game about reflecting back on your life. Like as you realize your life is coming to an end, like how it becomes necessary to reflect on where you've come from and where you are. And one of the things Metal Gear Solid 4 does, and we kind of talked about this, I believe, during the Goosebump Effect episode, our very first episode, but one of the later areas of Metal Gear Solid 4 is a return to Shadow Moses Island, which is where the entirety of Metal Gear 1 takes place. So it brings Snake's life full circle to a return to this place that was so formative in who he is. And you come back to Shadow Moses, and the end of this sequence, this chapter, because Metal Gear Solid 4 split into location-based chapters. You globe trot to do different objectives. The end of this chapter is a massive escape sequence wherein you must rely on, to save your life, Metal Gear, a rebuilt Metal Gear Rex, which is the very thing that nearly destroyed your life the first time you were at Shadow Moses Island. So there's a massive escape sequence where you're trundling through this military-industrial complex, piloting the very robot that not only nearly killed you, but also consumed your brother's life. And killed your brother. And now you have to rely on it to save your own life. And the apex of this massive escape sequence is you finally get out of like this warehouse, and then you have to fight Metal Gear Ray, which is being piloted by your old enemy, Revolver Ocelot, who is at this point now possessed by the consciousness of your dead brother. So, I mean, essentially, it's just like a giant robot fanboy dream, right? Because you are in your giant robot, and Ocelot is in his giant robot. And it is just this massive, destructive, cathartic, explosive kaiju battle, because all the robots just scream like Godzilla for some reason or another. Why? Because it's cool. And at this point of the game, right, you've gone through some really challenging stealth sequences, right? Just nail-biting stealth. So there's just this nearly orgasmic catharsis at this moment in time, because this is just balls to the wall action at this point. Yeah. You're just thundering around as a giant robot, just firing lasers and like contrail missiles, and like your Metal Gear Rex, so you have this big jaw, and you can bite onto Metal Gear Ray and like lift him up and like slam him to the ground, and then you like scream like Godzilla, and then you can like stomp on him and like take a jump back and like pelt him with missiles while he's writhing on the floor. And it's a level of spectacle that is just insane. And you're just fulfilling this, if you're a Metal Gear fan, this lifetime dream of controlling a Metal Gear, which has for decades been your enemy. Like the thing you've dedicated yourself to destroying across how many games, and now you are relying on it to save your life. Yeah. It's like, from a narrative perspective, a mechanical and presentational perspective, it's just this moment of like jaw-dropping catharsis and but also like heavy emotional weight.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible.
Yeah.
And as is popular in Metal Gear, mechanically unique. And that's what Metal Gear's always done well. Like all of its boss fights always have a special wrinkle. But this is taking it to a new level because it's practically a different game. Like this is like a From Software developed like giant mech fighting game. Like this isn't even Metal Gear.
Yeah.
Because you are Metal Gear. Like it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And this is what Kojima does. Yeah, this is why we love him.
Yeah.
Those of us who love him. This is why we love him.
Yeah.
Just these cinematic moments.
All right. I've got a couple that were specifically requested by Ken, one of my patrons.
Oh yes.
I kind of want to save these for when we do specifically look at final bosses, but I do want to acknowledge that Ken mentioned them because they are good bosses that I do want to talk about at some point. One of them is Reikakuze from the end of Project 03, and the other one is Darth from the end of Blue Reflection. I've actually mentioned Darth before when we did our Goosebump Effect episode.
Oh yeah,
the music in that sequence. So I just want to put a pin in those two for the moment because they're ones that I specifically want to explore in the context of sort of final boss encounters. So, but I did want to acknowledge them. The last one I want to talk about today is actually another final boss, but because I've played and experienced it recently, I wanted to bring it up now, which is one of the final bosses of the story routes in Peach Beach Splash.
Oh, cool.
Each of the 4 story routes in Peach Beach Splash concludes with a mechanically unique boss fight. So rather than fighting against like smaller enemies or like the other characters, there will be some sort of giant boss to fight. And the one I particularly wanted to highlight was the one at the end of the Gessen route, which it's actually 2 bosses. So Mr. K and Miss R, who are actually Kiria and Rin. For people who are familiar with Senran Kagura. So Kiria is the Hanzo guy's teacher and Rin is the Hebijo group's teacher. They are both sort of emceeing the Peach Beach Splash competition, and they decide sort of as a grand finale to the competition they should sort of test the winning team's skills in some way. And so the way they decide to do this in the Gessen route is that they get into these giant mech suits and that have sort of surfboards on the feet, and then just challenge the team of them to take them down, basically. And so what this fight comes into is you fight one of them at a time, and it's a battle where you can't damage the boss until you sort of knock them out of the air into a sort of weakened state, but you knock them into that weakened state by sort of doing things that would deal damage to them. So it's a combination of learning their various attack patterns, avoiding those attack patterns, keeping an eye on your teammates and making sure that they stay standing, and if they don't stay standing, finding a suitable opportunity to go in and rescue them, and then dealing damage whenever possible. So, like I talked a bit about earlier with the various mechanics in Peach Beach Splash, this becomes a nice combination of using your weapon, using your character's basic agility, and using those cards, and sort of having a suitable deck of cards available to actually deal with this confrontation. So, depending on how much you've leveled up your characters in your team, you might want to take along some more defensive cards with you to deal with these attacks, or you might want to take along some of the more offensive cards so that when the boss is in a weakened state, you can then just hurl everything you've got at them. And so this for me is a good example of a final boss that sort of tests your skills that you've learned throughout the rest of the game in a slightly mechanically different way to the rest of the game. So rather than just confronting you with a tough fight against a character, it is making use of the same mechanics in a slightly different context. And it works really well because after a little while it sort of kind of takes on almost the feeling of like sort of a cooperative multiplayer raid boss almost. Because although you're playing it in single player, you are having to pay close attention to what your team is doing. For a lot of the rest of the game, you can almost get away with ignoring your team and either letting them get on with it or even letting them get defeated and then take out the rest of it yourself. But in this case, the bosses are so tough that you need to actually pay attention to the rest of your team, make sure they all stay standing, make sure that they're all doing their bit. And so in various ways, this also highlights the importance of the game's other mechanics besides the immediate shooter gameplay stuff. So you can get through it without doing any upgrades to your cards and your characters and so on, but it's much easier to get through and get a good grade on if you go back and you get some more cards and you level up your characters and you level up your weapons so they do more damage and so on. So it's sort of a very practical example of the difference that those additional progression mechanics make to the game, without sort of explicitly saying, hey, you should probably go and upgrade your cards a bit now. It's something that sort of, if you go and do that, you will see it. It's still beatable without that sort of thing, but it's quite difficult to do that. And so it's just a nicely designed boss fight that was a lot of fun to do. And so like you fight the first one of these and you defeat them, and then you have to go and fight the other one without sort of recovering any of your life and lives that you might have lost in the first section as well. So so you have to sort of gradually. It will probably take you several attempts. It took me several attempts to do. Not like sort of a frustrating amount or anything, but it still took several attempts to do. And sort of each time I was getting a little bit better at it. I was getting a little bit better at observing these attack patterns and being able to dodge them and keeping my team up and running and so on. So, and you also sort of spot some mechanics that you might not notice throughout the rest of the game as well. So in Peach Beach Splash, there's this mechanic called Soaking Wet Power Up, where where the more wet your character gets, if you fill up this gauge of them being soaked, then they will enter a temporarily powered up state where you have infinite ammunition for a little while, you do more damage and all that sort of thing. And one thing you might not notice in context, because a lot of the battles in the game are so chaotic, is the fact that if you're sort of standing around with your teammates and there's nothing going on, they will often come up to you and they will just squirt water on you. And you will think, why are they doing that? But sort of in the kind of intermission between these two boss fights, because to get to the second boss fight you have to run across to the other side of the stage. If you don't do that immediately, your team will all gather around you. They will all cover you in water and get you into this powered up state to start the next and second phase in. And so that's something you might not have come across up until that point in the game. And so you think, oh, okay, yeah, this is actually quite important. Maybe I should try and do this more often. And so, there's some nice little touches like that really emphasise the kind of teamwork aspect, which, as we said earlier on, has always been a very key part of Senran Kagura's presentation and narrative and that sort of thing. People working together in their groups to sort of overcome a common enemy or a common challenge. And yeah, this boss is a good example of that. And based on what I've seen of the other bosses so far, so I've only done the other Hanzo boss so far as well, but that was mechanically very different as well. That one was more a sort of time-based thing where you had to defeat something before it got across the map, and presumably the Hebijo and the Crimson Squad bosses are going to be different again. But again, an example of making good use of teamwork, making use of the game's other mechanics, and sort of providing a slightly different twist on what you've been doing throughout the rest of the game. So that's good fun. Cool. Right, so that is a nice selection of boss fights that we've talked about today. This is something that we will almost certainly come back to at some point, because there are lots of bosses in games. There's lots of cool final bosses. There's all sorts of interesting things we can talk about with this. So, but we have gone on for quite a long time at this point. So we shall leave that there for now. So, as always, would you like to tell people where to find you online, Chris?
Absolutely. You can always find my artwork at MrGilderPixels.com or on Twitter, Tumblr, or Instagram at MrGilderPixels.
Fabulous. And you can find my written work at MoeGamer.net. If you're watching this podcast on YouTube, stay tuned to my channel for my various other playthroughs and series. So on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, we have the Atari A to Z series, where I look at Atari 8-bit, ST 2600, and Atari arcade games. On Wednesday, we have the Warriors Wednesday series, coming towards the end of Warriors Orochi now. On Fridays, we have the Final Fantasy Marathon, where I'm playing through Final Fantasy 1 at the time of recording, and other bits and pieces when I can be bothered and or find the time to do them. So, as always, thanks for watching and or listening, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. Be sure to check out MoeGamer.net for new articles on Japanese and Japanese-inspired video games, new and old, every weekday. Every month, MoeGamer features an in-depth exploration of an individual game or series as its cover game, so be sure to check the archives to see if your favourite has had a deep dive yet. If you'd like to support the site directly, please consider becoming a patron or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.